We're joined in this portion of our program, and here we are. It's Super Bowl Sunday morning. Yeah, big game later today. Well, at least I think it's supposed to be a big game, isn't it? Yes, of course, you're on the fan. We're joined in our program. I'm Bob Salter, joined by David Schwartz. David is Director, Counsel to the New York Association of Wholesalers and Distributors. He's also an attorney and partner at Gertzman Schwartz LLP, and he's joining us on our program. We should have a very interesting discussion today, talking about, in a way, I guess what can be phrased as New York's dirty secrets. Now, some of you are going to think to yourself, what on earth is he talking about by New York's dirty secret? Well, stick around. David, it's nice to have you join us on our program. Good morning.
Great to be here, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a little bit of background. The New York Association of Wholesalers and Distributors. Can you explain what the organization does?
Yes, the organization is made up of wholesalers, mainly in New York. We have wholesalers of tobacco products and cigarettes, and these are the agents that put the tax stamp, that collect the revenue for the city and state of New York for the taxes on cigarettes. So they are the ones that collect the revenue and remit it to the New York State government and the New York City government. Also in our association, we have a retail section, and we have other interested members in cutting off the this epidemic of crime that's going on with untaxed cigarettes.
Okay, we're going to get into talking about exactly what this encompasses, the scope of it, and of course of this discussion. Also, I always like to mention a couple of different times in discussions, is there a companion place on the web where people who want to can go and perhaps learn some information that goes along the lines of what we'll be talking about today?
Sure. Our website is nyupandsmoke.org, and people could reach me also at dschwartz@gothamgr.com if they have any questions about this issue.
We will repeat both of those items in the course of this discussion. How did you first become interested in this topic?
Well, I've been involved in the distribution channels of these products for a long time. I became a lawyer, but I've been involved in this, and I took over this association, and I represent all the various wholesalers that are getting brick and mortar, family-owned wholesalers that are just getting destroyed out there due to illegal activities and other organized crime activities that are out there. These are business people that sell legal products, and it's in New York's best interest to make sure that these products are sold legally and every product is taxed properly.
How were those people, your members, the people you're representing, how were they faring anyway with, everybody's been in the past 2 years, feel like they've been in a time warp with COVID.
Right.
How has that been impacting their business?
Well, most of our businesses are essential businesses. So it goes from the wholesaler to the retailer. The retailer there's over 9,000 retailers in New York City. The average bodega, the newsstand, convenience store, grocery stores. These are essential jobs, and these are the stores that were open. This was the brick and mortar during COVID, and the way the retailers got their supply is from wholesalers, like the ones that I've described. So it's the entire chain that was essential during COVID, and it was very tough to do business. But some of our smaller retailers did okay because everyone was flocking to their corner store to buy supplies and buy everything that they wanted.
Your organization did an undercover report, as I understand. That's, I guess, at the heart of what we'll be talking about here. Give us kind of an overview of that, and
Sure.
what did you find?
So let me lay out the problem first. The problem here is that 80% of the cigarettes sold in New York City are illegal, untaxed cigarettes. They're coming up from Virginia. They're coming up from Georgia. They're coming up from North Carolina. It's been well documented over the years. Congressman Peter King did an entire report on this, on how much money is flowing through the I-95 corridor from lower tax states to higher tax states. And that's really the essential problem. And you know, people say to themselves, oh, maybe it's a few cartons here, a few cartons here. How about, Bob, $2.5 billion worth of cartons a year, 2.5 billion that New Yorkers are losing every single year due to untaxed cigarettes.
Wow.
New York City is the epicenter of untaxed cigarettes. About 80% of the cigarettes sold in New York City are untaxed. Only about 20% are taxed. If you go back over the past 15 years, Bob, we've lost $37.5 billion due to untaxed cigarettes and the government not cracking down on this problem. It's a loss in tax revenue, but it's also a loss to the honest, hardworking business people of New York, whether it's on the retail level, the grocery store level, or the wholesale level, that are losing out on those sales.
How exactly, David, are cigarettes taxed in New York City and New York State?
Right. So in New York City, we have a joint tax stamp. So basically, in New York State, the tax on every carton of cigarettes is $43.50. So that's throughout New York State. However, New York City, we even have an additional tax of $15. So every carton is taxed at $58.50, by far the highest tax in the nation. And that's why New York City is the epicenter of untaxed cigarettes. So it goes to a wholesaler that's an agent of the city and state of New York. And these cartons go through a machine, and the tax stamps are affixed to the packs. Once they're affixed to the packs, they go out for sale. They either get sold to other wholesalers or to retail establishments like bodegas, convenience stores, and newsstands. And that's basically the way the distribution channels work, or are supposed to work. But right now, we've got this 80% of the marketplace that's completely illegal. So that's what precipitated the undercover report that my organization did.
How long did it take to do that report? I guess what all was involved too?
Right. So it was a couple of months, and we used former NYPD. We had some high-level former law enforcement officials organizing the sting operation. And basically, people went out to first we had to identify the stores that were selling illegal cigarettes, but also a whole load of other illegal products. And it's in broad daylight now. It used to be out of the trunk of a car. Now it's in broad daylight. And I'd say over 95% of the stores don't even have licenses. And this is a crazy thing also, that the government, that New York State has been enforcing the law on licensed stores, but where they see an unlicensed store, it's not even on their list to even go in there and see what's going on. So they're selling illegal vapor products. You know, we have a flavor ban in New York, and it was actually passed by the FDA also. So there's a flavor ban. But in these stores, and in my undercover report, which we have undercover video as well, it identifies the products that they're selling. So they're selling illegal vapor products, illegal cigarettes. So what's the problem with that? Because you have law-abiding stores across the street or right next door who are abiding by the law, and now all the customers are going into the illegal stores and buying all of this, and no one's cracking down on it. So what I want to do is I want to do the government's work for them. We do have, the city has an enforcement division, the state has an enforcement division. There have been great investigations throughout the years, taking down these illegal cigarette operations coming in from North Carolina to New York. But I wanted to do it at the grassroots level, to go into these stores. So my undercovers went into these stores. They bought $10 Marlboros with no tax stamp, or maybe a Virginia tax stamp. You know, when a Marlboro should be, at least $15, $15, $16, $14, $15. So they were buying it for 10. It had no tax stamp. And this is a multi-billion-dollar ring. So, if New York wants to collect more money, this is a way of doing it. And Bob, this is not a smoking issue. In fact, the anti-smoking organizations support what I'm saying. They do support. They support. Look, they don't support anything to do with cigarettes, right? But certainly they don't support when you pass the highest taxes in the country, they don't support people going to illegal methodologies to buy it. So when you make a tax that high, you've got to close down the marketplace. And New York has failed miserably to do that. So we're hoping to do more of these operations, give it to law enforcement, give it to the media, and just to try to get some attention on this issue. And economics is only one part of it, Bob. There's also the criminal elements. These are prime targets for criminal enterprises to take advantage of the disparity in price and to raise money for terror, that's been linked to terrorism, criminal operations. The first bombing of the World Trade Center was done with illegal cigarette money. So this is a serious problem, both from a national security standpoint and from an economic standpoint.
When people are listening to us hear you say some of the things that you've just said, they may be horrified. But I want to back up for a second because you mentioned about having this report, the investigation taking place, providing this information to law enforcement. What have they done with it?
Well, it's new. It's in their defense, the report has just come out. We've given it to them. They're analyzing it, and I'm hoping they'll double back on the work that we did and go back into those stores and hopefully bring proceedings against these stores in order to ultimately shut them down, because these are basically criminal operations. And another thing that we're doing is we're going to do a lawsuit campaign. So not only are we going to rely on law enforcement, we're going to rely on the civil courts of New York also. And we're going to sue these stores. And not only are we going to sue the stores for running illegal operations, for unfairly competing, for putting other stores at a disadvantage, but also, we're going to sue the landlords of these stores too for knowingly allowing criminal operations to operate in those stores. So we'll see how we do with this. It's a new concept, but we are going to go after it in a lot of different ways.
That's an interesting, multifaceted approach. As I was listening to you talk about this idea of traveling along the I-95 corridor, basically, and we've heard this talked about for years, quite frankly. As I'm listening to you say that, I'm thinking, well, what about going to the start of that trip and those who are on that end? How does someone go after those folks as well?
Yeah, look, it's been done. And that's where it's not only a state of New York problem, even though we're the epicenter of the problem, it's a national problem. And,
Right.
Law enforcement, they've had some good operations. They've had some good undercover operations over the years, taking down criminal rings. I think we should do more because, look, you're right. We're a store in North Carolina, basically, the statistics are ridiculous when you think about it. You would have to believe that a store in North Carolina, that every single customer smokes like, 100 packs of cigarettes a day for them to supply their local communities. They're clearly not supplying their local communities. They're supplying people with trucks and cars who are taking those cigarettes and bringing them up the I-95 corridor. So look, to me, it's common sense to stake out these stores, to find the stores. We know how much each store sells. We know that the numbers are so way out of whack. They're disproportionate. So you're 100% right. I would love to see law enforcement, really clamp down on the initial point of contact, the initial stores in North Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia. That's mainly where it comes from. But in government's defense, they have had some nice takedowns. The Attorney General, in a case where there was many indictments, many convictions, and people went to jail. So that's what we have to do. We have to start, getting these operations going and sending these criminals to jail. But they're taking advantage of a window of opportunity, and they're assessing the risk and the risk reward where it's worth it to them to bring this stuff up.
That's it's a sad commentary that is the case, but they're also crafty. They're also slick, smart.
Yep.
They know what they're doing. in terms of being able to pull this off in best fashion too. We were talking with David Schwartz on our program. David is Director, Counsel to the New York Association of Wholesalers and Distributors. He's also an attorney and partner at Gertzman Schwartz LLP. You mentioned earlier the website NY Up in Smoke. That's all is one word, .org, where you can find out information about some of the things we're talking about in our discussion too. As you're talking, I'm also thinking about something that you mentioned, which I'm sure grabbed the attention of some of the folks listening to us a few minutes ago. When you talked about some of the revenues, if I can phrase it that way, or monies gotten from these proceeds, basically having financed or been part of the financing of that first attack on the World Trade Center.
Yep.
I mean, that kind of information, I would think, shouldn't that really just smack people in the face about the reality of what we're talking about here?
It should. It really should. It's not taken seriously when you look at it, you know, in the micro viewpoint where, oh, there's some street peddlers and some dealers and they're selling illegal cigarettes. But when you look at the macro problem of this, it's enormous. It's an enormous problem. It's multi-billions of dollars. And we know these are all criminal enterprises engaging in, some of which have been linked to terrorism. And that first bombing of the World Trade Center absolutely has been linked to illegal cigarette money. And that's scary. That's scary. Look, Bob, anytime this rivals narcotics, this rivals drug rings, and it's easier to sell because it's a legal product. The product is legal. It's just this window of opportunity that the criminals are taking advantage of and raising tremendous amounts of money for these criminal organizations. And then, of course, the local bodega owner is left, you know, with very little. So whether you support cigarettes or not support cigarettes, it's irrelevant. This is a security issue. And it's a revenue issue. And certainly that corner bodega, if they're supposed to sell 40 cartons a week and they're only selling 6 because the store across the street is selling illegal cigarettes, that's a big problem. And that's happening over and over and over again. And that's the person, those are my plaintiffs, Bob. Those are my plaintiffs. Those are the people that I want suing the criminal enterprise across the street. So I'll be working on that in the next year of trying to gain a lot of these cases and maybe even trying to make some new law on this and also suing the landlords, because a landlord cannot knowingly allow a criminal enterprise to rent out their stores. They cannot allow that. So I'll be going after the landlords too, who allow this to take place.
From the legislative point of view, what kinds of moves have been taken from the standpoint of, let's say, state lawmakers?
All negative moves. It's all been negative. The anti-smoking crowd has dominated the legislature, and they've enacted, in my opinion, and I know there'll be a lot of debate on this, some illogical policies that have caused this multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise to move forward. So we passed laws in New York to make it more and more restrictive, but that creates more of a criminal element. When you make it more restrictive, you don't regulate and close down the marketplace, it's going to create a field of illegal operators in the marketplace. And that's exactly what happened. The idea that New York could create such a high tax, look, and from their point of view, all good motives, you know, they want to get people to stop smoking. Okay, but if you do that, you got to close down the marketplace. So when Mayor Bloomberg, and that he'd raised the cigarette tax in the city, it was 80 cents a carton. He raised it to $15 a carton, you know, a 1,700% increase. And all of a sudden, we lost 60% of the sales, like the next day, basically. And he ran around saying, look, I stopped people from smoking. It was ridiculous. He didn't stop anyone from smoking. They all went from getting it from legal sales to illegal sales. And that's That's all that happened there. So we've had a lot of government policies over the years that have caused this this problem to take place. And we've had a lot of stores going out of business, a lot of lost business in New York, and it's a shame.
When you talk about that idea of lost business, one of the things I had read in preparation for our discussion today is, and correct me if on this if I'm wrong, is it something, a figure of something like 3,000 stores that had cigarette licenses closed their doors in the past year?
Well, yeah, that's a big problem. I don't think it's 3,000. I don't think it's that many. Well, although it may be. I'm not sure of the exact number. What's happened is they put a moratorium on cigarette licenses because they feel that's great. People can't get it from more and more places. But what happens is when you take away a legal cigarette license, you create more and more places where people could buy illegally. So one of the things we're going to fight for is to try to at least get back those licenses for honest stores. If a store loses their license and they lose their license, another store should be able to get a cigarette retail license, a tobacco retail license. And also the same thing is happening with the flavor ban. Fine, they have a flavor ban, but they haven't stopped these illegal smoke shops, and they're opening up all over the place. They're selling illegal cigarettes, and they're selling flavored vapor products. And that's really comes through clearly on my undercover videos, where they're blatantly buying vapor products. They're in the windows. So they pass a law, but they do no enforcement of the law. What's the point? Passing a law, stopping legal stores from selling, and then now you have all these illegal stores popping up. It's terrible. These laws are illogical when you think about it and when you see them in practice. So our government needs a lot of work. They need to crack down on this problem. They need to take out all these illegal stores that don't have cigarette licenses. They don't have vapor. They don't have tobacco licenses, and they need to shut these stores down, but they're not doing it.
What about the situation with what I guess can be referred to in New York State as tribal consumption when it comes to cigarettes and way in which taxes work?
Right. It used to be a much bigger problem. The tribes, they used to sell regular cigarettes like Marlboro and Newports and common brands for much cheaper. There's been some actually good legislation now where they have their own methodology of taxing it, and they don't sell those brands anymore. So they could sell their own brands, but not those brands. So it hasn't been as big of a problem. There is a little bit of a problem there, but it used to be a much worse problem. The big problem right now are the illegal major brands coming up the I-95 corridor.
And then I guess, I mentioned that idea, or I was inquiring about that idea of going after basically at the source. Obviously the efforts in New York City, New York State. What about in those areas along the way? These other states that these cigarettes are passing through.
Absolutely.
And is there any sort of a cooperative effort? Is there a need for, I guess it would be on the part of law enforcement doing multi-state task forces?
Absolutely. So you have Homeland Security, you have ATF, you have New York NYPD, the FBI. They've had joint investigations. Certainly one back in 2018, there was a 242 count indictment charging 17 individuals with money laundering. Up the East Coast, untaxed cigarettes. The defendants were from a lot of places in New York City, but also Westchester, New Jersey, Virginia, and North Carolina. They traced this network. It was an intense investigation. The NYPD Intelligence Bureau was involved. The Attorney General's Organized Crime Task Force was involved. Homeland Security, New York State Department of Taxation and Finance. So they were all partners in this, and the defendants went to jail. There were 17 defendants. They all went to jail, and this was very successful. They saved about, it was a few $1,000,000, but this needs to happen more and more.
Mhm.
And really, it's a great business for the government too, because, and the DA's offices have done well, because when they take down an illegal cigarette operation, even a local DA, okay, they get forfeiture money. So if they confiscate the illegal cash that's related to these illegal sales, plus the illegal cigarettes, because even though they have bad tax stamps, they're still good products. The products are good. It's just they're illegal from a tax stamp standpoint. The local DA's offices get to keep that money and put it into all their various programs, their community service programs, and they all have lots and lots. I'm a former Brooklyn DA, so I know a lot about this, and they're able to use that forfeiture money to put into these programs. So it's from a business standpoint, it's really worthwhile to go after these criminal enterprises. At the end of the day, you're not, the money that you spend in doing these investigations, you're going to make it back tenfold, because we've got this multi-billion-dollar problem that we're dealing with. So I'm going to be meeting with all of them, explaining this and explaining how their forfeiture operations could do very well by going after these criminal enterprises.
But what happens with, when they seize, when these investigations or stings takes place, what happens with the cigarettes? Are they destroyed?
Yeah, sometimes they're destroyed, but other times they're auctioned off. There have been auctions where it's still good product. So there's auctions, and the government can keep that money as well. That's one of the things we're going to work on, is, to try to, increase these operations, get more and more illegal product, and create a mechanism where the government can have auctions and sell these cigarettes to other wholesalers that'll put a legal tax stamp on it. So not only are you gaining money, the forfeiture money, but you're taking an illegal carton and turning it into a legal carton by putting a New York State tax stamp on it. So you're gaining on both sides.
Now, dare I ask, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't, what some will refer to as the organized crime element factoring into this. Do we have any idea of how strong an influence there is?
No, I really don't. At least the latest investigations, the traditional organized crime is not very much in this arena right now. But when we say organized crime, it could include any types of organized crime. So it can include anybody. So when we talk about organized crime, yes, of course, especially this criminal enterprise where 17 individuals were taken down. That was organized crime. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but it's a criminal enterprise. It's an organized group committing these crimes. And most of the cigarettes coming up are not. Yes, of course you have people just grabbing truckloads and bringing them up, but most of the time these are organized groups of criminals that are organized. They're well funded, obviously. They've made all this money off these illegal cigarettes, and they are they're organized. There's certainly organized criminal enterprises in this arena. And they have it down to a science. They really do. They're able to get into New York, unload, go to all their various stops where they unload this stuff, and get out. They do it very quickly.
And the natural question that comes to mind is, or I'm going to make the assumption that in many cases, they are, shall we say, significantly armed, weaponized.
Absolutely. When you're look, it's part of the business, right? So when you're operating in this world, I would assume that they're armed. There certainly have been links to arms, but when you think about it, they're buying it. It's not like a drug operation. They have a truck. They're buying it from North Carolina. They're buying what looks like to be a legal sale if they were going to use it in North Carolina or sell it in North Carolina. But by bringing it up to New York, it becomes an illegal sale, and they're unloading it on stores. So are these real dangerous operations that they're involved in? It's pretty common there, and really, it's really not that dangerous. It's not like these drug operations and heroin sales and where obviously there's a lot of guns and drugs. These are more innocuous. You're grabbing cigarettes. Yeah, you've got a lot of money in cigarettes, so you would assume that there are guns involved. But to be honest, there really haven't been that kind of gun violence surrounding this. It's been more of this organized type of criminal enterprises, and of course linkages to terrorists and other criminal organizations.
David Schwartz is talking with us on our program on the Fan on this Super Bowl Sunday morning. I'm Bob Salter. David is Director Counsel to the New York Association of Wholesalers and Distributors. He's also an attorney and partner at Gernsback Schwartz LLP. NY Up in Smoke, that's all is one word.org, a website that you can go to and find out information along the lines of what we were talking about in our discussion. And that leads us perfectly into the area that I wanted to focus on too in this discussion, because people have been listening to things that you've been talking about this morning with us. And one of the thoughts I had heading into our discussion today is, okay, in the area of public awareness, people hear you talk about this issue, maybe they get outraged by it. What can they do? What can the average person do?
They should contact their local elected officials. And like we talked about, this is a federal, state, and city problem. So we've got all the various branches. So we should put pressure on our local elected officials and say, hey, this is a serious problem. You're not this year because we got all that money in from the federal government. But when that money runs out next year, that money will be gone. We're going to be strapped for cash, right? In New York, we're going to be strapped. So where are the cuts going to come? We're going to cut firehouses. We're going to cut police. We're going to cut education, right? We're going to make all these cuts. Eventually, we're going to make cuts because the money's going to stop trickling down from the federal government at some point. So it can't last forever. And we do have this, deficit that's really mixed in. We got bailed out last year. So where is this money going to come from? This is where the money's going to come from, Bob. We're losing $2.5 billion a year. Before they raise our taxes, before they cut our police, they cut our fire, they cut education, they cut other health initiatives, they cut whatever else they're going to be cutting, okay? And however else they're going to be raising our taxes, why don't you collect the revenue that's there already? The illogical part is, every bunch of years we get a tax increase because we need to raise more money. It's the only tax, Bob, that's revenue negative. Think about that concept. When you raise a tax and you lose the sales, it's revenue negative. So all these new taxes that they have brought on this product, okay, it has become revenue negative. So we have to demand that law enforcement cracks down on this. It's not even like the old days where it's out of a trunk of a car. Okay, it's in broad daylight. I went to 47 of these stores. It's in broad daylight. They're selling it in broad. The illegal flavors are in the front. $10 Newports are advertised. Everybody knows it's illegal. So how can they raise our taxes, cut our services, and not crack down on the $2.5 billion cigarette problem? That's where we have to demand our government raise this money. We have identified, and they don't disagree with it. By the way, the government, I've had debates with government officials, and they'll say, it's not a $2.5 billion problem. It's really a $1.3 billion problem. Okay, it's all right, you're right, Mr. Government. It's a $1.3 billion problem. Fine. Let's take your number. And your number's wrong, by the way. My number's right, but we'll take your number. So what are we talking about here? How are we letting all these billions of dollars just go to criminal enterprises and criminal elements, and we're going to cut services? So people have to reach out to their local leaders, their local senators, their local assembly members, their local Congress members, the executive branches of government, the mayor's office, the governor's office. And we got to start cracking down on this. I reach out all the time. My organization reaches out all the time. The retailers, we organize them, but we need average New Yorkers to reach out. And by the way, if you're an anti-smoking advocate, which a lot of people are, probably the majority of the population, right? This should even go more to your core. I'm not advocating pro-smoking. I'm not advocating cigarettes. I'm advocating collection of revenue and safety of our citizens. So that person who's an anti-smoking advocate should be even more outraged and should tell their local government that, hey, if we're going to sell these products, they should be sold at a local brick and mortar licensed store. So that's one thing.
What about the idea of, that's one of the things I'd read about in preparation for our discussion today, was the idea of, I believe it was a tax stamp for all cigarettes with a New York State tax stamp for sales outside New York City.
Right. So, okay. So, we want every pack of cigarettes to have a New York State, New York City. In the city, it's a joint stamp. Outside of New York City, Long Island, it's a state stamp.
Right.
So we need every pack to have a New York City stamp on it, because when it has a legal New York City, New York State stamp on it, we know that we're collecting the full amount of revenue from that pack. And it's a great deal for the government, because the cigarette tax agents, they buy these stamps and rolls, and the government just takes the money right out of their, the money's just flowing right to the coffers. So the more stamps they sell, the more money New York State, New York City makes. So obviously we want every pack with a New York City, New York State tax stamp. We could have, I would love for our reward program to be picked up, where just average citizens, they go to some of these stores, if they see a Virginia stamp or a North Carolina stamp, they'll be able to call, they'll be able to make a complaint and get a reward for that, because it'll be worth it. It'll be worth to share money with the people on the street finding these illegal sellers, and they're not that hard to find. So that's certainly something I would like to see. That's our reward program that we've been pushing for a while also.
How has that been received as an idea?
People love it, members of government love it, but we don't get anywhere with it. It just doesn't get just for whatever reason, we can't get that implemented. We have a whole load of ideas that we would like to see implementation on. The governor Cuomo actually put together a tobacco coalition recognizing this problem. We were one of the advocates nonstop to put this coalition together, but so far the coalition hasn't done anything. So it's just right now it's a lot of talk, but we need some action. We need a lot of action, and that's why my organization is starting to do these undercover operations. We're going to try to neatly package this to hand over to them so they could take action.
All right. Now, the other thing I haven't asked you about, but you mentioned it earlier, was getting the media involved in this too. All right, it helps bring awareness. What kind of receptiveness have you had?
When people listen to what I'm saying, I get very good feedback that, whether it's elected officials or people in general, they understand the issue. If they want to logically listen to the issue. There's other offices I've gone into where, they say, I don't even want to hear it. It's cigarettes. I don't want to hear it. But what about $2.5 billion that you're losing every single year? No, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. So I get a lot of that too. I don't want to hear it. I hate the product. I want to see it illegal, but sir, it's not illegal. All right. So why don't we collect the 2.5? It's a loss, it's a lost cause, these conversations sometimes. So I try to find my political champions who are logical. They may not be for the product. Most people are not for the product, but they are for collection of revenue and public safety. So they're for that. And I try to stick with the logical, and shows like this where I have a format to really articulate the issue. People understand. I'm sure most people listening to the show will understand what I'm talking about. And I'd be willing to bet the majority would agree with me, as opposed to a show where I got a 2-minute soundbite somewhere and I'm trying to, get all this out. It's a very complicated, complex set of issues. The whole distribution network, how you methodically brought me through the steps. You have to do that. So on a 1-minute soundbite, probably a lot of people will just wave their hands and say, okay, whatever. But this is a real problem, and I'm hoping we can attack it.
Well, it certainly sounds like it's something that should be getting a lot of attention, a lot of focus, and it's a story to definitely be watched, and to watch some of the coverage associated with this too. Now, earlier in our discussion, you mentioned both website, and also you mentioned an email address at the beginning of our discussion. Would you repeat both of those, please? Sure.
It's D Schwartz, DSCHWARTZ at GothamGR.com, GOTHAMGR.com. And just email me if you want to get any more information about this. Go onto the website, and I'm hoping that people will take great notice of this issue, and maybe we could get a coalition and do something about it.
Let's say in the next year, 12 months from now, where do you anticipate, or where would you hope to be?
I would hope, and this sounds like a very low expectation, but I'm reasonable, right? So 80% of the cigarettes sold in New York City right now are illegal. If we could get it to next year at this time to 65% or 60% and break through about 20% of the illegality, that would be a win. I mean, people would say, are you crazy? 60% of the cigarettes sold are illegal, 40% are legal. Well, if we could take it from 80% to 60%, and then to 50, and then to 30, and then to 20. I know this is not going to change overnight. This is too big of a network. The I-95 corridor, it's a criminal enterprises. These trucks are flying up here. But if we could put a little dent into it, then that would be a big deal. That would be a really big deal.
Certainly, thank you for sharing the information you have in our discussion. Certainly, good luck with your efforts too.
Thanks so much, Bob. It's been a pleasure.